My name is Charlotte Webb, and I'm 36 years old. 19 months ago, my father slid a piece of paper across the dining room table, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Sign this. Sell the house to Isabelle for £190,000, or from this day forward, you are no longer part of this family." 190,000. For a house valued at £570,000, the house my grandmother left me. Her only grandchild who had stayed by her side through the last 6 years of her life, through the hospital appointments and the sleepless nights, through every difficult morning and every frightened evening when the darkness felt too close. They expected me to cry. They expected me to fold. What they didn't know was that before that family meeting had even taken place, I had already made a phone call to the managing director of the firm where my sister worked. But before I go any further, if you're finding this story worth your time, please take a moment to like and subscribe, though only if you're genuinely enjoying it. And if you'd like, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. It means more than you know. Let me take you back to the day my grandmother passed away. To understand what happened, you first have to understand what it was like growing up in the Webb household. Growing up meant living entirely in Isabelle's shadow. My parents never pretended otherwise. At Sunday dinners, at Christmas gatherings, at birthday parties full of aunts and uncles who all seemed to arrive with the same set of opinions already formed, the comparisons came constantly, reliably, like the English rain outside. Isabelle was the golden child, sharp, driven, destined for remarkable things. I was the afterthought, tolerated, appreciated, occasionally, for being no trouble. Isabelle will go far, my mother used to say, her eyes bright with a specific kind of pride she reserved only for her youngest. And Charlotte, well, at least she's got a good heart. A good heart. As though kindness were a consolation prize you collected at the end of a race you hadn't quite managed to finish. When I chose to become a primary school teacher, my father's disappointment was something you could feel physically in a room. He stopped asking about my work altogether. No more, how are the kids this term? No more, any news at school. Just absence. Where interest should have been. But when Isabelle secured her position at Harrington and Vale, a prestigious property development firm based in the city, my parents couldn't stop talking about it. They rang every aunt, every cousin, every neighbour on the street who would stand still long enough to listen. Their youngest daughter was climbing the corporate ladder. Their youngest daughter was going places. At family gatherings, the pattern repeated itself so reliably it could have been scripted. Everyone would crowd around Isabelle, asking about her latest developments, her glass-walled office, her company car, the deals she was closing. And me? I sat at the far edge of the conversation, somewhere between the window and the wall, invisible. "So, Isabelle, tell us about that new Riverside scheme," Uncle Martin would say. Leaning in with genuine fascination, nobody ever asked what I was teaching that term. Nobody wondered about the children whose entire relationship with reading I was quietly shaping. To them, helping a 7-year-old discover books wasn't a thing worth discussing over the roast. The dismissal happened so gradually that I almost didn't notice it. Somewhere along the way, I had become furniture in my own family, present but overlooked, functional but easily forgotten. I accepted it then. I would not accept it forever. My grandmother, Margaret, was different. She saw me, truly saw me, when no one else bothered to look. Every Sunday afternoon, I'd drive to her Victorian terrace on Weatherly Lane in Leeds, and we'd sit in her front room with cups of tea that were always slightly too strong, while she told me stories about growing up in the 50s, about dancing at the Mecca Ballroom, about the jobs she'd worked before women were expected to choose between a career and a family. "You remind me of myself, Charlotte," she told me once, studying my face. Quiet strength. People underestimate that terribly, but quiet strength outlasts the loud kind every single time. When the doctors told her she had stage 4 pancreatic cancer, everything changed. They gave her 14 months, possibly 2 years, if she responded well to treatment, and if she was lucky, Isabelle was too busy to visit. A new project at work, a client dinner in Mayfair, a weekend conference in Edinburgh. There was always something more pressing than a dying grandmother. My parents drove up twice in the first month, stayed for under an hour each time, and then stopped coming altogether. "It's too hard seeing her like this," my mother said, over the phone, her voice carrying a particular quality it always had when she expected sympathy for the cost of her own absence, as if their discomfort somehow outweighed Gran's loneliness. So I made a decision. I took an extended leave of absence from school. I packed a bag, drove up the M1, and moved into the spare room of that Victorian terrace on Weatherly Lane. For 6 years, from the first round of chemotherapy to the very last morning, I was there, administering medications, cooking her favourite meals, sitting with her through the long nights when the pain was bad and sleep wouldn't come and the hours moved like something heavy and reluctant. My mother called once during that time, not to ask how Gran was managing, not to offer to drive up and give me a break. She called to say this: "You're wasting the best years of your life, Charlotte. It's not as if she has anything to leave you." I put the phone down without answering. Gran passed away on a Wednesday morning in February. The thin winter light was coming through the curtains, turning the room a pale, quiet gold. Her hand was in mine. She was at peace. "I've sorted everything for you," she whispered, so softly I had to lean close to hear. "Don't let them take it away from you." I didn't understand those words. Not until the solicitor read out her will. The reading took place in a solicitor's office in Leeds city centre, 3 weeks after the funeral. Dark wood panelling, floor-to-ceiling shelves of legal texts. The kind of room that smelled of old paper and quiet authority. My parents sat together on one side of the long conference table, Isabelle on the other. I took the seat nearest the door. Mr. Carver, Gran's solicitor, cleared his throat and began. "I, Margaret Rose Ellison, being of sound mind and full understanding, do hereby bequeath my property, situated at 14 Weatherly Lane, to my granddaughter, Charlotte Ann Webb, the only one who stayed when the rest of the world moved on without me." The silence that followed was extraordinary. My father's face went the colour of old chalk. My mother's mouth fell open in a way that reminded me of something from a cartoon. But it was Isabelle's reaction I remember most vividly, her perfectly manicured fingers curling inward, pressing into her palms, her jaw tightening, her eyes going very, very still. "There must be some error," Isabelle said, her voice stripped of its usual warmth and reduced to something clinical. Gran wasn't. She couldn't have been thinking clearly when she signed this. Mr. Carver removed his glasses and polished them slowly with a small cloth from his breast pocket. "I can assure you, Miss Webb," he said calmly, "your grandmother was entirely competent. This document was witnessed, notarized, and executed in full compliance with every legal requirement, 570,000. That was the current market value of the Victorian terrace on Weatherly Lane. And Gran had left every brick, every floorboard, every Saturday afternoon memory to me. As the meeting concluded, Mr. Carver handed me a sealed envelope. "Your grandmother asked me to give you this personally," he said quietly. "She said you'd know when to open it." I slipped it into my bag without looking at it. Walking out of that office, I could feel Isabelle's gaze on my back, like a hand pressed between my shoulder blades. When I turned, I saw something in her face I had never seen before. Not frustration, not disappointment, but something sharper and more deliberate. She was looking at me like I had declared war. The pressure started 3 days after the funeral. My parents arrived at the house. My house. Now, without ringing ahead. They let themselves through the front gate as though the place still belonged to whatever version of the family, excluded me, settled into Gran's sitting room, like judges, assuming their positions, their expressions a carefully rehearsed mixture of concern and wounded righteousness. "We need to talk about the house," my father began, setting down his mug with the kind of deliberate care that signalled a speech was coming. "What about it?" "It isn't right, Charlotte. One person keeping all of this." He gestured at the high ceilings, the original Victorian cornicing, the bookshelves Gran had built up over 40 years of church sales and second-hand shops and birthday gifts. "Family should share," my mother added. "Isabelle is at a stage in her life where she needs to think ahead. Marriage, children, a proper home. This house would be perfect for her future. And what about my future?" I asked. They exchanged a glance. The specific kind of look parents exchange when a child has said something they consider touchingly naive. "Sweetheart," my mother said, her voice softening into its most reasonable register. "You're a teacher. You don't need a house like this. Isabelle is building something. She has real ambitions." There it was again. The same sentence I had been hearing my entire life, just dressed up in a different coat. Every day for the next fortnight, one of them returned, sometimes together, sometimes alone, as though they were taking shifts. My father issued warnings. My mother cried. They took turns playing the reasonable parent and the devastated one, their scripts so predictable I could have written both parts myself. "If you don't share this with your sister," my father finally said, standing in Gran's kitchen with his arms folded across his chest, "you will not have a family anymore." I lay awake that night going through the numbers in my head. If I sold to Isabelle at the price they were demanding, I would lose £380,000. I would lose my home. I would lose the last physical piece of my grandmother I had left. But if I refused, I would lose my family. The choice seemed impossible, until I understood something I had never properly seen before. I could lose my family as it had always been. But I couldn't lose myself. They called it a family meeting. It felt considerably more like an ambush. My parents arrived at 7 on the dot, taking their seats in Gran's sitting room with the settled authority of a tribunal. Isabelle arrived 20 minutes late, sweeping through the front door in a blazer that probably cost more than a week of my wages. She didn't apologize for being late. People like Isabelle never do. "Right," she said, scanning the room without bothering to sit down. "Let's get on with this. I've got dinner at 8:30. My father produced a document, a transfer agreement, already drafted. Here's what's going to happen. Charlotte, you sign this. You transfer the property to Isabelle for £190,000. We put the whole thing behind us." I looked at the figure. Then I looked at my father. The market value is £570,000. Isabelle made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Market value. Do you actually know what that means?" She crossed her arms. "Have you ever sold a property? Have you ever sat across a table and negotiated a deal? I work in this industry every single day. Trust me, £190,000 is more than generous. It's a third of what it's worth." "It's family price," my mother interjected. "That's how families work. That's what families do for each other." The conversation circled like something waiting. Every objection I raised, they had a counter prepared. Every time I held my position, the pressure intensified. They were very good at this. They had practiced. "This is a family decision," my father said eventually, in the tone he used to close arguments. "This is my house." Isabelle stepped closer, her heels making a precise, deliberate sound against Gran's original floorboards. "It was Gran's house," she said. "You just happened to be standing in it when she died. I was there for 6 years, Isabelle. And I had a career to build." She said it without embarrassment. "Some of us have real responsibilities." She mentioned something vague about a scheme that required the property, a development project. A planning application. She didn't elaborate. I didn't ask. After Isabelle and my father left, my mother stayed behind. She waited until both cars had pulled away down the street, then turned to face me with tears already forming in her eyes. I had seen this performance before, at school plays, at my graduation. At every significant moment where she had needed something from me in sentiment was the most efficient currency. "Holly, can we just talk?" she said, then caught herself. "Charlotte, can we just talk?" "The two of us?" I gestured to the sofa. She sat, producing a tissue from her sleeve, with the timing of someone who'd rehearsed this. "You're tearing this family apart," she said. "Do you understand that? Everything your father and I gave you, everything we built for you, you're throwing it all away for a building. It's not just a building, Mum. It's Gran's home. It's where she lived her entire adult life. And it's mine now. It's bricks and mortar." Her voice cracked at precisely the right moment. "Family is blood. Family is forever. This house will fall down one day, Charlotte. But family is supposed to last." She reached for my hand. I let her take it, because some habits are too old to break quickly. "Don't you remember being little? Don't you remember all those years we looked after you, all the things we sacrificed? And this is what you give us back." The guilt moved through me the way it always had, rising like something uncomfortable and familiar. She knew exactly which buttons to press. She had installed them herself. "I love you, Mum. I love this family. But I can't sell something Gran trusted me to protect." Her expression shifted. The tears dried up faster than they'd appeared. "I'm giving you 1 week, Charlotte." She stood, smoothing her skirt with deliberate composure. 1 week to think sensibly about this. After that, don't bother ringing me. Don't bother coming round. As far as I'm concerned, I won't know you." She walked out without looking back. The front door clicked shut behind her with the sound of something being decided. I sat alone in Gran's sitting room, surrounded by her things, her books, her photographs, her particular way of arranging a room, and I wondered whether keeping this house was going to cost me absolutely everything else. My phone rang at 11:30. I was already awake, had been awake for hours, lying in the dark staring at the ceiling when Isabelle's name lit up the screen. Some part of me considered leaving it. But something else, something quieter and more instinctive, told me I needed to hear whatever she was about to say. "Did I wake you?" Her voice was completely different now. Stripped of the warmth she performed for our parents, stripped of the brittle theatrical edge she'd used at the meeting. What was left was something cool and professional, and very, very certain of itself. "What do you want, Isabelle? I want you to understand something." A pause, the faint sound of ice in a glass. "This standoff you're staging, it's quite sweet, in its way. But you need to understand who you're actually dealing with." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. My sister." She laughed softly. "I'm not just your sister, Charlotte. I'm a senior development manager at one of the largest property firms operating in the north of England. I have relationships with planning authorities, with contractors, with people at the council. I have favours owed to me that you can't begin to imagine. Is that a threat?" It's context. Another pause. "You work at a primary school, don't you? It would be such a shame if someone started raising serious concerns about a particular teacher's conduct. Budget constraints are savage at the moment. Schools are always looking for a reason to restructure their staffing." My blood went cold. "You wouldn't. I wouldn't have to. I know people who know people. That's how the world actually works, Charlotte. Perhaps they didn't cover that module in your PGCE." She ended the call without saying goodbye. I sat in the darkness for a long time afterwards, my phone still in my hand. On the bedside table, Gran's photograph watched from its silver frame. That specific expression she had in it, the one that always looked like she was about to tell you something important. Then I did something I had never done before. I opened my laptop and typed a name into the search bar, Harrington and Vale Leadership. I didn't know precisely what I was looking for. But I was finished being the one who waited to see what happened next. I remembered Gran's words. Don't let them take it away from you. The sealed envelope had been sitting in my bag for 3 weeks. That night, I finally opened it. Inside was a letter written in Gran's handwriting on her cream writing paper, the kind she used for important things, and a business card. My dearest Charlotte, if you're reading this, it means someone is trying to take what I've given you. I knew this might happen. Your parents never understood the value of things that cannot be bought. If you need to protect the house while protecting yourself at the same time, ring the number below. Sandra Okafor was my solicitor for many years before Mr. Carver. She specializes in creative property solutions, and she will help you find a way through. Remember, Charlotte. Keeping something doesn't always mean gripping it with both hands. Sometimes the cleverest hold is the gentlest one. All my love, always. Granny stared at the name for a moment. Sandra Okafor. There was something faintly familiar about it. Perhaps Gran had mentioned her once years ago. I put the card on the kitchen table and went to bed. I rang the number the following morning. Charlotte Webb. Sandra's voice was warm, measured, professional. Margaret told me you might ring someday. I'm very glad you have. I need help. My family is trying to pressure me into selling my grandmother's house for far less than it's worth. Tell me everything. I did. Every threat, every scene, every midnight phone call. When I finished, Sandra was quiet for a moment. Have you heard of a sale and leaseback arrangement? No. It's straightforward in principle. You sell the property at full market value, not a penny less. As part of the transaction, you negotiate a long-term lease, allowing you to continue living there. The buyer acquires an investment property with a reliable tenant already in place. You receive the full value of the sale and the legal right to stay in your home. Nobody can pressure you out of a legally documented tenancy. My heart began to beat faster. But who would purchase a house where the seller stays on as a tenant? Sandra's answer changed everything. Tell me, she said carefully, the address of your grandmother's property, 14 Weatherly Lane, the Victorian Terrace in Headingley. Silence on the line, then a low, thoughtful exhale. Charlotte, are you sitting down? Why? Because I attended a rather interesting meeting last week. Harrington and Vale, one of the largest property development firms operating in Yorkshire, have been actively searching for a character property in that exact part of Leeds. My stomach dropped through the floor. Harrington and Vale, that's Isabelle's firm. Yes, I know. Sandra's voice carried something I couldn't quite identify. A quality somewhere between professional composure and barely contained amusement. Their managing director, Richard Harrington, is looking to establish a northern satellite office. A high-end residential conversion with the right bones and location. Your grandmother's house would be exceptional for his purposes. The irony settled over me like a second skin. Isabelle worked for a firm whose managing director was searching for exactly what I had. What's Harrington like? I asked. Strictly professional. Has very little patience for personal drama. He makes decisions on the basis of commercial value. If a deal makes sense, he pursues it. If it doesn't, he walks away. Sentiment is not a factor in his calculations. I thought about Isabelle's threats. Her certainty that she could reach into every corner of my life and reorganize it to her own specifications. If Harrington buys my house, I said slowly, Isabelle would have to work there. From what I understand, he intends the satellite office to manage regional accounts. Senior development managers would rotate through on a scheduled basis. The poetry of it was almost too much to absorb. Isabelle demanding my home, then being assigned to report there under her own managing director's authority. This isn't revenge, I said, more to myself than to Sandra. No, she agreed. It's property law, and it's a very good deal for almost everyone involved. Set up the meeting. My parents chose the nuclear option. They called it a family dinner. What it actually was a venue for my public humiliation, carefully arranged with an audience already in place, extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins from both sides. Everyone gathered at my parents' house in Wetherby on a Saturday evening, the table laid with Gran's china, and the deep, painful irony of that particular choice was not lost on me for a single second. Halfway through the main course, my father rose from his chair. He tapped his wineglass with a knife until the room settled into silence. "I want to raise something important," he announced, "something that concerns all of us." Fawkes paused mid-air. Every face turned toward him. As most of you will know, Margaret left her house entirely to Charlotte. He paused, allowing this to settle. What you may not know is that Charlotte has refused to share it with her sister. She has chosen a building over her own family. Murmurs spread around the table like something contagious. Disapproving glances landed on me from all directions. My mother began to cry. Long, theatrical sobs that drew sympathetic looks and gentle pats from the assembled relatives. "She's changed since Margaret passed," Mum said, pressing a tissue to her face. "I don't even recognise my own daughter anymore." "That's terrible, Patricia," Auntie Susan said, reaching over to squeeze her hand. Uncle Martin shook his head in my direction. "Charlotte, you really need to think about what family means." "Isabelle has plans," my mother added. "She's thinking about the future, marriage, children, a proper home, and your grandmother's house would be perfect for all of that." There it was. The implicit suggestion that my life, my career, my 6 years of caring for Gran, my entire existence, amounted to something not worth factoring in. "Charlotte," my father said, his voice hardening, "everyone in this room knows what the right thing to do is." 20 pairs of eyes turned to face me, waiting. I felt very small and very alone. But I also felt something I hadn't expected. Underneath the smallness, something was crystallizing, clarity. Isabelle wasn't finished. She stood from her chair, smoothing the front of her jacket with the unhurried precision of someone accustomed to having the room's attention, and walked slowly around the table until she was standing directly behind me. I felt her shadow fall across my shoulders like a hand. "Let me explain something to everyone here," she said, and her voice had the particular quality of someone addressing a meeting rather than a family gathering. "My sister is a primary school teacher. She teaches children to write their names and sound out their letters." Scattered, uncomfortable laughter from certain parts of the table. "She doesn't understand property. She doesn't understand investment. She doesn't understand anything about building security or planning for the future." Isabelle placed a hand on my shoulder lightly, in the manner of someone acknowledging a subordinate. "Charlotte was in the right place at the right time when Gran became ill. That's all this comes down to." "I was there for 6 years," I said quietly. "Anyone could have done what you did." She said it without hesitation, made a bit of soup, changed the sheets. It's not exactly a specialist skill. Auntie Susan nodded. Uncle Martin murmured something in agreement. I looked around the table at these people who had known me since I was small, who were now arranging their faces into expressions of collective disappointment. And in that moment, I understood something I had been too close to see before. This was never about the house. It had never been about the house. Isabelle didn't want Gran's property because she needed it. She wanted it because I had it. Because for the first time in our entire lives, I possessed something she could not have. And that fact was simply intolerable to her. She leaned close to my ear, low enough that only I could hear. "You think you've won something, but you have no idea what you're actually playing against. This is my game, Charlotte. It always has been, and I always win." I said nothing, but inside something changed. The fear I had been carrying around like a second coat simply dissolved. What replaced it wasn't anger, and it wasn't bravado, it was steel. I stood up, no speech, no tears, no dramatic declaration, just the quiet, definitive act of rising from a chair while 20 people watched in complete silence. I looked at my father first, then my mother, then Isabelle. Then slowly, I let my gaze travel the full length of the table, face to face, relative to relative. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. "Thank you all for showing me, very clearly, exactly where I stand." "Charlotte, sit down." My father's voice was sharp. No, the word hung in the air like something extraordinary. When had any of them ever heard me say no? I walked toward the hall. Behind me I heard chairs scraping back, voices rising. My mother calling my name with her most practiced version of desperation. I didn't turn around. Outside, the night was cold and very quiet. A fine drizzle misted against my face as I sat in the car for a full minute, my hands pressed flat against the steering wheel. They were trembling, not from fear, but from something far more alive than fear. Then I took out my phone and rang Sandra. "It's Charlotte. How did it go?" "About as well as you'd expect." I started the engine. "Ring Richard Harrington. Tell him I'm ready to discuss terms." "Are you certain?" "Once we begin this process. I've never been more certain of anything in my life." A pause. "I'll make the call first thing tomorrow morning." I drove home through the rain-soaked streets of Headingley, past the takeaways, still lit up on the high street, past the Georgian terraces and the Victorian rows, past all the ordinary houses where ordinary people were having ordinary evenings without ultimatums. When I pulled into Gran's driveway, my driveway, I switched off the engine and sat in the darkness looking up at the house. I don't need to defend myself with words, I thought. I'll let the paperwork do it for me. 2 weeks later, Richard Harrington sat across from me in my living room. I want to pause here for a moment. If you've ever been made to feel that the choices you made, your career, your priorities, the way you chose to spend your time, weren't quite enough in someone else's eyes, drop the word enough in the comments below. I need to know I'm not the only one who's felt that. And if you're curious about what happens when Isabelle's managing director walks through my door, stay with me. This is where it gets interesting. Richard Harrington was not what I had imagined. Somewhere in his mid-50s, with close-cropped silver hair, and the kind of quiet authority that didn't require a raised voice or a designer suit to announce itself. He wore a charcoal jacket that was clearly expensive and entirely unpretentious, and his handshake was firm and unhesitating. "Miss Webb," he said, taking in Gran's sitting room with the attentive eye of someone who actually looked at things. "This is a remarkable property. Original Victorian cornicing, intact tiling in the hallway, exceptional proportions. I can see completely why your grandmother loved it. She spent 44 years here," I said. "I spent 6 of those years with her." He met my eyes directly. That kind of dedication is rare. I respect it, genuinely. We moved through the house together, the formal dining room at the back, the small study lined with Gran's paperbacks, the conservatory that overlooked the garden she had tended every spring for 4 decades. Harrington asked careful, thoughtful questions. Not just about square footage and structural condition, but about the property's history, its character, what made it what it was. When we settled back into chairs in the sitting room, he folded his hands on his knee. "Sandra explained your proposal," he said. "Full market value sale with a 20-year lease back. It's unconventional, but it suits what I have in mind. The ground floor converts beautifully to office space. You retain the upper floors as a private residence with complete autonomy. And the price? $570,000 full market value." He paused. "May I ask something directly?" "Yes. Why are you doing this?" "You could simply refuse to sell and remain here on that basis alone." I considered deflecting. Instead, I told the truth. Because certain members of my family have been attempting to force this property from me through a combination of pressure and threats. A legal structure, a signed contract, is something they cannot undo, regardless of what they threaten afterwards. Harrington nodded slowly. I appreciate your directness, Miss Webb. There's something else you should know. I held his gaze. Isabelle Webb is my sister. A flicker of something, not quite surprise, but something adjacent to it, crossed his face. Then, unexpectedly, the corners of his mouth turned upward. I had a feeling that might be the case. You knew? Isabelle mentions her family occasionally in passing. She's referred to a sister who teaches in primary education. When Sandra contacted me about a property being offered by a teacher named Webb in Headingley, the connection wasn't difficult to make. And you're still interested in proceeding. Harrington leaned back slightly. I don't make business decisions based on the domestic arrangements of my employees. I make them on the basis of value. He glanced around the room. This property has significant value. Your proposal has significant value. What's happening between you and your sister is a private matter, as long as it has no bearing on the transaction itself. Something in my chest released, a tension I hadn't even been aware I was carrying. He produced a folder from his briefcase. My solicitors drafted the agreement. Standard sale and leaseback terms. 20-year lease. Fixed monthly rental set below market rate as per our negotiation. You retain exclusive residential rights to the upper floors. We undertake the ground floor conversion to office use. I read every page. Sandra had already reviewed it, had already confirmed everything was sound and properly documented. But I read it myself anyway, because I needed to. Purchase price, £570,000. Lease term, 20 years, with the option to renew, monthly rent. Considerably lower than anything I'd expected, the product of careful, patient negotiation. My hand was steady as I picked up the pen. Not quite, actually. There was the faintest tremor in my fingers, and it was nothing to do with fear. It was the physical sensation of relief becoming real. I signed my name on the final page, Richard Harrington countersigned. The notary stamped and witnessed the document. "Congratulations, Miss Webb," Harrington said, shaking my hand with genuine warmth. "You've made an exceptionally sound decision. The funds would arrive in my account within 72 hours. £570,000, minus completion costs, and I would still wake up every morning in Gran's house. In my house. One more thing," Harrington said, closing his briefcase. "The satellite office opens next month. Isabelle will be assigned to the regional accounts team based here." I smiled. I couldn't help it. The invitation arrived at Isabelle's desk 4 weeks later. I know this because Sandra told me. Harrington's PA had confirmed the arrangements. A firm-wide event marking the launch of Harrington and Vale's new Northern Satellite Office. Attendance required for all senior development managers. The address on the invitation, 14 Weatherly Lane, Headingley. My address, on the evening of the launch. I stood at my bedroom window upstairs and watched the catering company arrive. White gazebos went up in the garden. Strings of warm lights were threaded through the old apple tree Gran had planted in the early 80s. The conservatory, the dining room, the sitting room, all of it softly transformed into something corporate and beautiful while remaining unmistakably itself. Gran's house dressed up for a different occasion. Cars began pulling into the driveway. Senior executives in dark coats, staff members with lanyards and champagne glasses, board members craning their necks to admire the Victorian detailing on the facade. And then I saw her. Isabelle's grey Mercedes pulled up to the curb. She stepped out, adjusting her blazer with one hand and checking her phone with the other, typing something quickly, probably managing some last-minute coordination. She hadn't looked at the house yet. She was too busy. Then she looked up. I will never forget her face in that moment, the sequence of it. Confusion first, arriving slowly. Then disbelief, arriving all at once. Then something that looked, from 20 meters away, very much like the ground giving way beneath her feet. She stood frozen on the pavement, while colleagues streamed past her, laughing, greeting each other, pausing to admire the ivy and the original Victorian gate posts. I opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch. The evening air was cool, carrying the particular smell of early autumn in Yorkshire, something between wood smoke and damp leaves. Our eyes met across the garden. "Hello, Isabelle," I said, my voice carrying clearly. "Welcome to the new office." She didn't move. Couldn't. For a moment, a young colleague touched her arm. "Isabelle, are you all right?" Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "This is," she swallowed. "This is my sister's house. Your sister?" The colleague looked between us, thoroughly confused. "I thought Mr. Harrington acquired this from someone named Charlotte Webb." "He did," I said, walking down the porch steps onto the path. "I'm Charlotte, and this is still my home." The official program began at 7. Richard Harrington took his place at the small lectern that had been set up in the space where Gran's armchairs used to be arranged around the television. The room was packed. Development managers, senior staff, investors, a few board members. Isabelle stood near the far wall, her expression expertly composed, one hand wrapped around a glass of sparkling water. "Thank you all for being here this evening," Harrington began. "Tonight marks a significant moment for Harrington and Vale. This satellite office represents our commitment to expanding our regional presence while maintaining the quality and character that our clients associate with everything we do." He paused, scanning the room. "I want to acknowledge the person who made this acquisition possible." He looked toward where I stood. "Mrs. Charlotte Webb, who sold us this exceptional property and who will continue to reside in the upper floors under a long-term leaseback arrangement that protects her home while enabling our expansion." Applause moved through the room. I acknowledged it with a small nod, acutely aware of Isabelle's gaze from across the space. M's. Webb demonstrated impressive commercial intelligence and absolute composure throughout our negotiations, Harrington continued. Her grandmother maintained this property beautifully for over 4 decades, and I'm pleased that we've structured an arrangement that honours that legacy while serving the firm's ambitions. The applause grew warmer. Several people came to introduce themselves afterwards, executives shaking my hand, colleagues admiring the architecture, someone from the board asking thoughtful questions about the leaseback structure. And through it all, Isabelle stood motionless by the wall. When Harrington announced that senior development managers would be rotating through the satellite office on a fortnightly basis, with Isabelle heading the Northern Regional Accounts Division, based there, I heard someone nearby draw a sharp breath. Isabelle's colleagues turned to look at her with new expressions. Curious. Knowing. The kind of silent recalibration that happens when a piece of information arrives that changes the shape of everything that came before it. "Isn't this literally your sister's house?" someone whispered to her. Isabelle didn't answer. She didn't need to. Everyone in the room already knew. They arrived within the hour. Isabelle must have sent a message to our parents the moment she could get away from the gathering. Because my parents' car came up the driveway at speed, just as the last guests were departing, headlights cutting through the evening drizzle. My father was out of the car before the engine had properly stopped. "What have you done?" His voice cracked with something that was equal parts rage and disbelief. "You've sold Gran's house to outsiders." "I sold it at full market value," I said. "And I negotiated a lease that guarantees I can live here. That's the arrangement. That's not the point." He stepped closer, his face taut. That house was supposed to stay in the family. It was staying in the family, Dad. With me. Which is exactly what Gran intended. My mother appeared beside him, her mascara already beginning to run. "How could you do this to us, Charlotte? How could you humiliate Isabelle in front of her entire firm? Her colleagues, her boss, everyone was there. I didn't humiliate anyone. I made a legal business decision. A business decision." My father's laugh was short and hollow. "You're a primary school teacher, Charlotte. What do you know about business?" The words that would have gutted me a month ago now passed through me without catching. "I know enough to obtain full market value for a property you wanted me to hand over for a third of what it was worth," I said steadily. "I know enough to protect what Gran left me in the care of people who actually understood what they were doing." I met his eyes, and Isabelle threatened my career first. She told me she would use her contacts to have me pushed out of my job. I simply made sure that whatever happened next, I had a position no one could undermine. My parents exchanged a glance. Neither spoke. "I love this family," I said quietly, "but love doesn't mean allowing people to take what doesn't belong to them." My father opened his mouth, and then, for the first time I could remember in 36 years, he closed it again without saying a word. They got back into the car. The headlights reversed out of the driveway. The street went quiet again. I stood on the porch for a while after they'd gone, listening to the rain. Word travelled through corporate environments with remarkable efficiency. Within a fortnight, everyone at Harrington and Vale who worked with Isabelle knew the story in some form. The high-achieving development manager who had attempted to pressure her own sister out of an inherited property. The sister who had quietly sold the same property to their shared employer. The exquisite professional irony of Isabelle now being required to report to work at the very address she had demanded be surrendered to her. She couldn't raise a grievance with HR. There was nothing to raise. She couldn't appeal to Harrington. He had publicly expressed his admiration for the arrangement, and for my conduct throughout it. She couldn't avoid the satellite office. He had specifically placed her in charge of the regional accounts division housed there. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Isabelle's grey Mercedes pulled into my driveway at 8:45. I made a point of being visible, watering the window boxes as she walked past, collecting post from the box near the gate, having my morning coffee on the porch when she arrived, coat on, keys in hand, walking toward the converted ground floor office with a particular quality to her stride that she had never had before. We didn't speak. We didn't need to, but her colleagues noticed everything. The conversations that quieted when she approached. The careful glances exchanged across meeting room tables. The subtle, unmistakable shift in how she was regarded. No longer simply the rising figure who always got what she wanted, but a more complicated story. "Is that actually your sister's house?" I once heard a junior member of staff ask her, not quietly enough in the entrance hallway. Isabelle's answer was clipped and professional. "It's company property, but she still lives here, upstairs." That's a bit. Isabelle didn't answer. She didn't need to. Everyone had already formed their own view. The worst of it, I think, wasn't the professional discomfort. It was the loss of the thing she had always had and never questioned. Control. Isabelle had spent her entire adult life accumulating leverage, cultivating relationships, building a reputation as someone whose determination was simply greater than everyone else's. And here was evidence, twice a week, parked on the driveway, incontrovertible, that she had met something she couldn't move. My parents stopped ringing. For 3 months there was nothing, no demands, no guilt trips, no unexpected arrivals. The silence was strange at first. I had grown so used to their constant pressure that its absence felt like a physical change in the atmosphere, like the air pressure dropping before weather arrives. I didn't reach out either. They needed space to absorb what had happened. And I needed space to heal from what they had done, which was a different and slower process than I had expected. Then, on a Sunday morning in November, my phone lit up. Charlotte. My mother's voice was different, quieter, as though something had shifted inside it that she hadn't yet found the right words to describe. "Hi, Mum." A long pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, could almost feel her weighing things she had never had to weigh before. I just wanted to. I was ringing to see how you are. Just that. Another pause. "Are you all right?" It wasn't an apology. I hadn't expected one, not yet, and perhaps not ever in so many words. But it was something, a crack in the wall, a door slightly ajar. "I'm good, Mum. I'm well. The house looks lovely," she said. "I drove past last week. The garden looks just as it did when your Gran was alive. I try to keep it the way she would have wanted." More silence, and then, carefully, "She'd have been proud of you, Charlotte, what you did. Standing your ground like that. She would have absolutely loved to see it." I felt my eyes sting. Not from sadness, from something more complicated and more real than sadness. "Thank you, Mum. Maybe we could have lunch sometime, just the two of us. Nothing formal. I'd really like that." When I hung up, I sat in Gran's rocking chair by the window and watched the autumn leaves coming down through the afternoon light. Nothing was resolved. Nothing was forgiven. Not properly. Not yet. It would take much longer than a Sunday phone call for any of us to navigate our way back to something honest. But something had shifted. The relationship wasn't over. It was simply operating under new conditions. My conditions. Isabelle came to see me 6 months after the satellite office opened. I was at the kitchen table marking reading assessments when I heard the knock. Not on the office entrance at the front of the ground floor, but on my private door at the side of the house. 3 precise knocks. A pause. Silence. When I opened the door, she was standing there in her work coat, professional composure firmly in place, but her eyes told a different story. "Can I come in?" I stepped back to let her pass. She walked into Gran's kitchen, the same kitchen where we'd sat together as children eating toast after school, where we'd argued over the last of the birthday cake, where our entire shared history was written into the worn grain of the flagstone floor. "I thought we should talk," she said. "Like sisters, all right." She sat down across from me. Her hands, for once, were still on the table. "I never thought you'd do something like this. All those years, I assumed." She stopped. "You assumed I would always give way." "Yes." She looked directly at me. "I did. Why are you here?" "Isabelle." She shifted slightly. "I want us to have a proper relationship again. What happened? The house, the firm, all of it. I'd like us to move past it. Would we?" "I'd like to try." She paused. "There's also something else. Since you seem to have a good working relationship with Richard now, with Mr. Harrington, I wondered whether you might be willing to mention to him that the rotation schedule is somewhat disruptive to regional accounts. Having me based here twice a week creates complications, and there it was, not reconciliation. Negotiation." "Isabelle," I said, slowly, choosing every word, "being sisters doesn't run on contracts, but respect does, and trust does, and those things take considerably longer to build than a fortnightly rota." She looked at me for a long moment. "I'm genuinely open to rebuilding something between us," I continued. "But not because you want a favour from me. That's the pattern that brought us here." She left without a direct answer. But as she walked back through the hallway toward the door, I noticed something in her expression I hadn't seen before. Not the brittle certainty she usually carried. Something quieter. Something that might, given time and effort from both of us, become understanding. "I want to ask you something now. If you were in my position, if you'd been through everything I've described, what would you do?" Drop an A in the comments if you would try to forgive completely and work toward a genuine relationship. Drop a B if you would keep your distance as I have and let time do its slow work. I'm genuinely curious. And I read every single comment. A year on, I still teach at the same primary school. I still mark books at Gran's kitchen table on a Tuesday evening. I still wake up in the room where Gran spent the last years of her life, where the walls know her in a way they will always know her, where the particular quality of the light, through the bedroom curtains, on a winter morning feels like a kind of greeting. But everything around all of that is different now. The ground floor hums with professional activity during working hours, phones, keyboards, the measured murmur of meetings happening in rooms where Gran used to host her book group and her Sunday afternoon gatherings. Then 5 o'clock comes and the silence returns. My silence, my peace. I kept everything that actually mattered. Her rocking chair still sits by the front window. Her recipe book, the one with the cracked spine and the stains from 40 years of Sunday baking, still leans against the worktop in the kitchen. The little sachets of lavender she made every spring from the garden still scent the drawers upstairs. Sometimes in the early morning, before the working day begins on the ground floor, I walk through the rooms of this house and I feel something that isn't quite her presence and isn't quite memory, but exists in the space between the two. The echo of a life lived here, with extraordinary thoroughness and care, absorbed into the plaster and the floorboards and the glass of the windows. 570,000 sits in my investment account. Security I had never imagined for myself. Freedom I hadn't known I needed. An absence of financial anxiety so complete that I sometimes still feel the ghost of it before remembering it's gone. And yet the money was never the victory. The money was a consequence. The victory was walking through my own front door without bracing myself for the next demand. The victory was understanding, finally and completely, that my worth had never been something my parents or my sister were in a position to determine. The victory was knowing that what I was, the choices I had made, the years I had given, the quiet life I had built, was not less than what Isabelle was. It was simply different, and difference had never been the problem. The problem was that I had spent 36 years pretending it might be. Gran knew that long before I did. You remind me of myself, Charlotte. Quiet strength. People underestimate that terribly. But quiet strength outlasts the loud kind every single time. She didn't just leave me a house. She left me a demonstration of what it looks like to know your own value well enough to protect it. Legally, practically, without drama, without cruelty, but without yielding. People sometimes ask whether I regret how things went, whether I wish the path from that family meeting to where I am now had been less painful, whether the cost of keeping what was mine was worth paying. Here is what I tell them. I didn't destroy my family. I didn't issue ultimatums or burn bridges or seek out pain for its own sake. What I did was change the terms under which I was willing to participate. For the first time in my life, those terms accounted for what I actually needed. For the first time, they reflected my grandmother's view of me, rather than my parents' version of it. My mother and I have lunch together once a month now. She doesn't apologize, not in words, but she asks about my class. She remembers the names of individual children from one lunch to the next. She listens when I talk about them. It is not everything, but it is something that wasn't there before, and I value it carefully. My father maintains his distance. His pride is a substantial thing, and has not fully recovered. Perhaps it never entirely will. But at Christmas, standing in the kitchen while I made tea, he looked around Gran's kitchen and said, almost to himself, that she would have been pleased with how I was keeping place. It wasn't an apology either. But it was a door left ajar. Isabelle and I occupy a careful, functional truce. We are not friends. We may never be, in the way people sometimes imagine sisters ought to be friends. But when she walks past the porch on her way to the office on a Tuesday morning, she sometimes looks up and raises her hand in something approximating a wave. And I wave back. Is that forgiveness? I genuinely don't know. Perhaps it's something more honest than forgiveness, something that doesn't pretend the past didn't happen, but has found a way to exist alongside it. What I do know is this. The most powerful response to being wronged is not fury. It is not a confrontation that leaves everyone raw. It is not even a dramatic act of revenge, however satisfying that might appear in the imagining. It is a clear decision, made with full knowledge of your own value, executed with precision and care, and defended by something more durable than anger, a signature on a document, a phone call made before anyone expected it, a solicitor's letter that arrives before the pressure has time to build into something you can no longer withstand. My grandmother understood this. She had spent 44 years in that house, and she spent the last of her strength making sure I would be protected within it. She gave me the connections, the letter, and the example. What I did with those things was simply follow the blueprint she had left me, and in the end, the strongest boundary I was able to set wasn't a wall at all, it was a contract. If you take one thing away from my story, let it be this. You have every right to protect what belongs to you. And sometimes the quietest signature in the world speaks considerably louder than the most heated argument. Thank you for staying with me all the way through. If any part of this resonated with you, if you recognized yourself in any of it, whether you felt what Charlotte felt, or perhaps, in honesty, something closer to what Isabelle felt, leave me a comment. I read every single one, and if you'd like more stories like this, check out what's waiting for you in the description. This is Serene Drama Stories. I'll see you in the next one.